Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Laurie.
All right, everyone. This is Laurie and Jennie of Astropath, and we are talking today about the new moon in Scorpio that is happening on October 25th at 6:48 a.m. in Eastern Time. What's special about this particular new moon, Jenny?
It's also a solar eclipse. So we have
All
a
right.
couple of weeks of eclipses coming up.
Yeah, we
That
got
is
two
very much part of
eclipses.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, this is a partial solar eclipse. And yeah, so in 2 weeks, we'll come to a full lunar eclipse. But for right now, in this video, we're just going to talk very simply. We're going to try to keep it simple. These things get complicated very, very easily, but we're going to try to keep it simple and just focus on this new moon eclipse. Before we dig into this, I just want to say you can find Jenny at hiddenpathastrology.com. You can find me at astrolore.org. And you can like this video, follow us, subscribe rather, whatever, and make some comments. Let us know you're out there watching us. So do you want to just open up the chart?
Let's talk a little bit about the phases.
Okay.
Before we do that.
Good idea.
Yeah. I have to crack up as soon as you announce it's going to be simple, especially
Right.
with Scorpios involved in eclipse. This is a lot of complexity here. But I hear you trying to keep it reasonable.
Yes.
So let's start out talking about the phase. What does a new moon usually signify, Laurie?
Planting a new seed. You know, the phases of the moon it's the cycle of everything in life. We start with the new moon where we plant a seed. A week after that new moon, we come to the first quarter, which is really, pushing forward, growing. And then the full moon is the full illumination of that cycle, and which is a week after the first quarter, and then a week after the full. We've got the third quarter, which is a time of beginning to release the cycle. And then a week after that, we come to the next new moon. On the larger cycle, this new moon will illuminate into the full moon in Scorpio, which, do you have a date for that one?
Yeah, it's on May 5th, and it will be an eclipse.
Oh, it will be also an eclipse. That's interesting. That's interesting. Okay, so that kind of, a quick take on what the phases are. Anything else you want to say about phases?
The only thing I'll add is it's just really nice to think of these seasonally. We did our Scorpio video not long ago, so take a look at that too. But the phases kind of help you understand like how to work with that season week by week. So that's all I wanted to add. I guess I will add, because normally at a new moon we plant seeds, right? But since we're in eclipse phase, the focus is a little bit different. I like to think of it as, rather than being really focused on planting your new seed, it's more like you are focused on endings. You're focused on how to close down the prior cycle and make sure that you've done the necessary work to close that cycle down before you rush headlong into a new cycle. Right. In a lot of ways, I think an eclipse is just a pivot point. People get all worked up about them, and it's fair enough, because if you think about being an ancient person on the planet and having suddenly the light of the moon or the light of the sun go away, that's pretty scary, so it's no wonder that it has all these things attributed to it. But what I like to think of is, when the light is dimmed, you can work with things in a different way. You see a different view, you see a different doorway, you see something that you didn't notice before. And I think that is really something that eclipses are good for.
And this Scorpio one even more so, as far as the dimness, the depth that we really have to go to with this particular new moon.
I know. Well, it's interesting because I think this kind of segues us right into talking a little bit about Scorpio itself as an archetype. And I think what's funny about this eclipse is, a lot of times you think, oh, it's an eclipse, so we got to go deeper, but we're already really deep with Scorpio. So I kind of am interpreting this more as this need to like go into the deep emotional content of the Scorpio stuff, but then dig it up. and have bring it up more to the light. I feel like that's the pivot point that this eclipse might be bringing to mind, where you're not just going and silently doing this in the deep dark depths. It's like, you're having to work with it, really work with it, and bring it up more and excavate it so that you can actually see what the hell you're doing. That's more what I'm thinking.
Interesting. I like how, I like that perspective. Because it's Scorpio. So let's talk about Scorpio. What is Scorpio about? Scorpio is the fixed water sign. It is very deep, very intense. What are some of the things you think about with Scorpio?
Well, Scorpio is a catalyst. I mean, Scorpio is that thing that goes deep down underneath and digs up the thing that gets everything started. I mean, it has like this catalytic transformative component to it. It's also very regenerative. So I mean, I think about, how like a lizard loses its tail and it can grow it back. So Scorpio has the power to regenerate things. Because it's a water sign, I really think of it as tied in with the emotions and on a deeper level, kind of the soul, the wateriness of the soul. So it's like digging in and working with some of the deeper content to do with that. So you tend to see it tied in with the shaman, things like soul retrieval, and some of these deep things that, quite honestly, we don't talk a whole lot about in our society. But what I love about astrology is it's a circle of zodiac signs. So Scorpio comes out of, Libra, that's all like chatty and harmonious and whatever. And then Scorpio's like, okay, we've done that. Now we need to look at the emotional subtext beneath all that. Affability. And it's necessary. It's not, we try to ignore it, but it's not optional,
No, it's not optional. It's not optional. I love that you brought up the word regeneration, because I think that's, and you talked about who grows their tail back?
Lizards and other animals too. But
I love thinking about that regeneration of within Scorpio, that idea of regeneration, because it's so easy to kind of get stuck on the depth, the intensity, the darkness of Scorpio. But the purpose of Scorpio is to go into those deep places and then do that regeneration and come forth. It's like, people can get stuck on thinking about the scorpion with the sting. But, there are so many other images for Scorpio, the phoenix, that the necessity of that mythical bird to go deep into the underworld and then come out this glorious mythical creature. And even the spider, the jumping off without really, the spider can just jump and hold on to that little thread. And there's just something about that. Scorpio is a really powerful sign. It really is incredibly powerful, because it has that ability to do that. Wherever Scorpio is in your chart is an area where you have to go through major transformation, and you have to go into the darkness in order to do the work to come out above that.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, Laurie, because that's exactly the point. It's not that you go down in the dark and then you just stay there. This is about bringing things up into the light. And I'm glad you mentioned the scorpion, because the scorpion kind of is like you get the wound from the sting. And so there's a lot of stuff about Scorpio that's the wound. But the real point of it is healing that wound. It's not just staying in the wound. And that really is what you're having to do. And some of those things are deep and dark and difficult, but the point of it is exactly, that healing regenerative aspect.
What goes on inside the cocoon before the butterfly comes out? What goes on in there? It's not easy, light stuff. It's not like, we cannot transform ourselves without going through real intense stuff.
Yeah. And the idea here really for all of us, especially in our culture, is that we've got to turn and work with this stuff, because if you sweep it under the rug, it explodes and it's very destructive. So the whole idea is just that we know it exists. We have knowledge is power, and we can work with the power of Scorpio by doing that. So, All right.
So what's next?
Let's look at the chart, huh?
Oh, let's look at the chart. What a good idea. Let's do that.
Okay, so here is our new moon. You can see the sun and the moon together. You also will probably notice right away that Venus is right there in the mix.
Oh, look at that. Isn't
mhm.
that amazing?
Now look at that. The other thing I just want to point out, you know it's an eclipse because you see that other little symbol there, which in this case is the south node. It can be either the north or the south node, but at any rate, you're always going to see the sun and the moon near that node sign to know it's an eclipse.
Right. So, you know, if you've got your natal chart and you look at your natal chart and one of those nodes, either the north or the south, is right near the sun or the moon, you know you were born very close to an eclipse.
Yeah, and you
That's
might even
good
be,
information.
it is good information because that you might be more sensitive to eclipses, and that's something that's really helpful.
Right.
Some people are kind of like, whatever eclipses. Other people are
Yeah.
like, oh my, I get, you know, big
Right.
changes, big transformations.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think what the first thing is, you know, you see the sun and the moon right next to each other. But with Venus in the mix,
Oof.
this is going to impact our personal relationships. So the degree to which you can, you know, do some of this work to heal yourself on these deeper levels is going to have an impact on your relationship. It's going to allow it to deepen. It's going to allow you to open doors in a relationship that you couldn't before.
Yeah.
But again, it is that requirement. You've got to go in, you've got to look at your own things, those emotional triggers that come up when you want to blame someone else. You want to be like, oh, that jerk made me angry. Okay, well,
Right.
you got to look at your own angry, right? You got to look at, I said your own angry, but it is your own angry. You
It
have to be, well, you know, you have to look at that. I mean, the idea that it's a trigger.
Yeah,
like
your own
probably
triggers.
familiar. Yeah.
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 Yeah. When someone triggers us, it's not them, it's our own trigger. It's what, yeah. So it's really interesting having that right there with Venus. It will, this depth of emotion, this depth of this place where we need to release something, where we need to go really deep, is going to be really closely involved in our relationships, in our resources, our understanding of women. I think that there's something here regarding, you know, Venus is women also. It's what we value. So we really want to look at how we are valuing our relationships, how we're valuing our resources, what is valuable to us, and how are we valuing ourselves or other women in our lives.
Yeah, I like that you brought up that, you know, I mean, you can look at the symbol of Venus and it's the symbol of women, right? But I think that what's also important here is what we see externally in our world and our culture is how women are treated is representative of how we each grapple with the feminine inside of ourselves. And that has absolutely nothing to do with your biological sex. But each of us have those more feminine aspects, which might be, you could think about them as nocturnal aspects, like where you need to go into the dark, you need to have the quiet, you need to be okay with solitude, you need to work with your emotions. Those are all tied in with that symbol. And so this is a huge time in our lives and the world around us where we are grappling with this issue day and night, right?
Right. And this, you know, having the south node there, there's something from the past that's being dredged up in this conversation.
Ooh, yeah, that's an important point. I'm glad you brought that up too, because this is a south node eclipse. So we very much are looking at things from the past. We're looking at wounds that are still there from the past. We're looking at things that, as you just said, need to be dredged up to work with it.
And in Scorpio, I mean, you think about it, it's not only Scorpio, it's not only an eclipse, and it's also with the south node there. This is something being dredged up from the past.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think about as difficult and as challenging as complex this situation is. This is a major opportunity to heal something that has plagued you for a long time, that makes you combative, that makes you unhappy, that takes you out of the zone of contentment. I mean, this is an opportunity.
It's beautiful.
It's challenging.
Yeah.
But there you have it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, we could start looking at all the other aspects here, but I don't know how much more we really need to talk about. The one thing is that Mars up there. Do we want to talk about that? You know, we did the video on the Scorpio season where we covered a lot of this stuff. So I don't know how much we want to bring this in.
Yeah.
What
Well,
do you
let's, I mean, since you mentioned, I think
Since I mentioned
it's, yeah, it's valid because Mars rules Scorpio. So we are looking at that rulership, that all of those planets in Scorpio are looking to Mars going, hey, what do we do? Because we're in your sign, you know, we're in your house. What do we do? And so I think it is important to look at. And I also think the second reason, Laura, I'm glad you did bring it in, is because we were talking about that whole pausing idea. And I think this kind of brings it in.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
you know, I put that trine aspect there. There is a trine technically between Mars and these planets. However, it's out of sign. It's not a real strong trine aspect, but it is there. And the interesting thing is that Mars is getting ready to go retrograde. It is basically just stationed right where it is. Again, yeah, the pause. It's like this deep, deep shift that is happening, this deep inner wound that you're working with. You have to pause and let it do its work. I think there's an awful lot there of just like, don't start jumping up and down with these new revelations you're having. You've got to let it cook and materialize, you know, kind of do its work in there.
Yeah. And I mean, I think some of it is that because Mars rules out that Scorpio, there might be this tendency to be like, okay, I've done the work now, I'm ready to talk about it, I'm ready to externalize it, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, no. The message is to stay with the process. As I think you just said, Laurie, you need to stay with the process and choose your words carefully, choose your time carefully, allow yourself, you know, a pause, some space before you go, before you take action, before you speak up.
Right, because
you should, but
you've still got a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
You've still got a lot of work of understanding to do. That Mars ruling that eclipse is going to be retrograde through until mid-January. You've got a lot of contemplating your thinking before you're ready to bring it forward.
Yeah. And I believe we're going to do a Mars retrograde video. So we'll get more into that then. For now, I think it's useful just to think about, you know, Mars is in a Yang sign. It's in Gemini. So it's kind of like create space before you say your thing. And then astrology is always about repeating patterns. I think we've already showed you a few. We're in Scorpio, the South Node, we've got Venus in the mix. Mars is going to go retrograde. I mean, these are like 4 things that are kind of saying something similar about.
We could throw a few others in there too, but let's not complicate it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, so should we do the personal impacts?
Yeah, let's just jump right into that. Let's see. Okay. Now we're going to try, as we always do, to keep this as simple as we can, which is always a little tricky. But if you have Aries rising, this new moon eclipse is happening in your 8th house. Wow, this is a very intense new moon eclipse for those of you with Aries rising. You know, the 8th house is one of the most deep, intense areas of our lives. So you're really looking at how you go internal to grapple with other people's baggage, other people's opinions, other people's values.
Mm-hmm. So you can kind of think of this as the place of the greatest potential for you feeling triggered around this new moon. Like this is the place where, you know, you might be at the party and somebody says something about their value system and what they think, and woo, and it just gets your blood boiling. So this is a good time to just be aware of that and to know that and to utilize the pause that we are talking about, where just give yourself a minute before you sort of launch into stuff. It's not to say nothing. That is not the point here. The point is to give yourself a breath, give yourself a window, recognize that your blood is boiling, right? So that's the key.
Yeah, I think that really is. It's like you've got to really think about about what your triggers are and how you respond to them. Huh. I think it's probably as simple as that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, in that case, if it's going to be that simple, then let's just go right on to those of you with Taurus rising. All right. So if you have Taurus rising, this new moon eclipse is happening right here in your 7th house. So this is very much about your partnerships, whether it be your spouse or a business partner, but some issue around partnership is going to get your blood boiling. You've got to really go inward, give yourself that pause, really look at how you need to transform your way of managing this relationship.
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting because I think with those of you with Taurus rising, your primary partnerships are just like a mirror for you. Like you're looking in that mirror and they're going to reflect back to you some of these issues. So that is the reason why this is going to be so triggering, because it's really getting at some deep-seated struggle that you've had, and it's going to pop right up in your business partnership, your therapy session, your marriage, you know, you name it, whatever partnership it is that you're working with. But that's where your opportunity is. Your opportunity here is to take that pause, you know, like recognize that you're in an intense space with intense emotions before you launch into things. And that should help you at least be more aware, right?
Yeah, I think there's something here about really understanding your own autonomy. You know, somehow that Venus ruling your rising sign, that mirroring, just understanding that their stuff is separate from yours. It is that mirror, but it's a mirror. It's not, you're not one and the same.
Yeah, interesting. It's just funny because those of you with Taurus, like you're really getting extra ultra relationship lessons here with the Venus involvement, you know. So this really is an opportunity. And I think one of the things I think you've shared with me too, Laurie, is just the idea of like, how do you separate yourself and the relationship and then the third entity of the other partner? I mean, there's sort of three of you involved.
Yes.
And the mistake sometimes that gets made is confusing the relationship for the other person. And then you sort of stop listening to the other person because you think you're trying to manage the relationship, and there can be some confusion there. And those of you with Taurus rising, that's going to come to the forefront.
Yeah, people with Taurus rising have very intense relationships because Scorpio is always on that line and they're always doing that work of regeneration through relationship. So this is a really important time to pay attention to what is going on in your relationship, what, you know, and really taking that pause to understand that, it's not necessarily the other person.
Yeah. Rather than, you know, projecting your struggle or intensity, like it's for you to look within. So
it's so interesting. I mean, relationships it's a mirror, and we have to really understand how easy it is for us to project onto the other person our own stuff. But this is a very intense time. So do your work, take a pause, go deep, allow the transformation to begin to do its work, and take a pause in the process. All right. So now we're going to move on to those of you with Gemini rising, and this puts the new moon eclipse here in your 6th house. So what's happening here, Jennie?
Well, the 6th house is it's always a lot. The 6th house is about your routines, your practices, your day-to-day. You know, you get up in the morning, you brush your teeth, you do your meditation practice, you get in the car and drive to work with your breakfast sandwich. You know, it's all of those things, right? And I think that this might be the time to incorporate something of depth, you know, a new depth into what you're doing, to release something that is not serving you, that is causing you harm or wound or something like that. So that could be something to do with your eating. So, and then, you know, just choosing something, I don't know, just working with that level of intensity.
Yeah. there's some manner in which your routines need to be transformed, releasing something, maybe adding in something else, but it's got to have that depth to it.
Yeah, with it being Mars rule too, I always think about that this is something active, something where you can, Mars wants to grapple, struggle, do something external. So even though Scorpio is a very internal sign, Mars shows you that outward face of it, where it wants to apply a ton of intensity to move the needle forward on something. So I just really think it's important for anyone with Gemini rising here to work with a level of depth that perhaps you're not used to. I think that is going to be important, because Gemini is not the deepest sign, right? But this is where you're going to have depth.
Right. This is, and to understand that even a small tweak in that area of the 6th house can do very deep work.
Yeah. And because we were talking about that pause too, Laurie, I think that it's time for you to apply that, like, pause, find a little more space around this intensity here, and see what arises in that pause, because that's where the phoenix regenerates, right?
Yeah.
Is in that pause.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, good. All right. So now we're going to move on to those of you with Cancer rising. And if you've got Cancer rising, this new moon eclipse is happening in your 5th house. So the 5th house is the area where we give love. It's the area where we really give of ourselves. It's a very creative area. So what is the regeneration that's happening in your creative life, Jennie Date?
Well, sometimes I think about Scorpios like you got to peek under the hood, you're driving the car, but you need to look at what's making it all tick and what's going along. And I think with a eclipse like this, a solar eclipse in your area of creativity, you've got to look within at what blocks you from expressing yourself. Like, what is the thing that holds you back? What is maybe the thing you were told as a child to, like, stop playing around, and maybe it's become something that's deadly serious in your life at this point. So it's really about taking a look at that deeper stuff, and seeing what's there, what's holding you back. What's holding you back from loving unconditionally in the ways that you want to, those loved ones in your life, or what's holding you back from taking the risk that you need to take to put yourself out there. On the other hand, are you taking a risk in a wrong way? Are you overdoing risk in a place you don't need to? So it's those kind of questions we're looking at, right?
What needs to be transformed in order for you to really give of yourself with the kind of passion that Scorpio requires? Yeah, with Scorpio in the 5th house, you need to give of yourself with a great deal of passion. So really, really understanding what's blocking you from that, what needs to be transformed in order to open that, and finding that in the pause, taking the time to pause and contemplate that for future expression.
All right.
Okay.
Fabulous.
All right. So now let's move on to those of you with Leo rising. This puts the new moon eclipse here in your 4th house. What is the deep, deep intensity within home and family that you're working with right at this point in time?
Yeah, and I think for some reason, I mean, as you said, this can be home or family. It also can be land, so physically the place, beneath your home. So immediately for me, for some reason, what popped in my head is this idea of, like, where's home? Like, where have you landed? What do you need to let go of to embrace wherever you are as your home? What is the thing? What is the block, the wound, the trauma that is preventing you from fully embracing and allowing yourself to transform in the place you are right now,
or to transform to a new place where you need to be?
Mhm.
You know, I mean, if you are really aware that you're in the wrong place,
Mm.
this could be part of that. I mean, that's something, you know, just really going inward and understanding what your relationship to place is, what your relationship to home, to family, what is your relationship there, and what needs to be changed, what needs to be regenerated in that area.
Yeah. So, I mean, anyone with Leo rising, it's like these matters of home are very deep. I mean,
Yes.
this is also your lineage. I mean, in some
Yes. Yeah.
ways, this is kind of like the root of the chart. So it's kind of like what you're coming in with. And with the South node there too, you are being asked to look in some deep spaces.
Right.
You
Your
know, like,
whole ancestral line coming
yeah,
in
like
there.
why are you here? Where did you
Right.
get here? What is the train that led you here
Yeah.
on a deep level, on an emotional level? And then embracing, I think from what both of us said, kind of the either ends of the, are you in the right place? That truly home is inside of you.
Yeah.
It's in your heart. It really is. And that's really the bigger lesson here, and where you need to pause and allow yourself to recognize that.
Yeah. Allow your understanding to really go into very deep places about this whole issue of home, ancestral line, family, land.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Okay, so that will wrap that up. And now we're looking at those of you with Virgo rising. So, you know, the intensity here of the new moon eclipse falls in your third house, which is communication, possibly siblings, your day-to-day workings of your mind, the relationships with people like siblings, neighbors, yeah, the cashier at the grocery store, all of
Yeah.
that. But you know, your relationship, those of you with Virgo rising probably have extremely intense relationships with siblings, intense depths in your communications. It's important how you communicate, and that you really allow yourself to go into deep conversations. You know, with Virgo rising, you don't want to talk about the weather. You just don't. You probably want to talk about death and sex and, you know,
Like
intense
someone I can think
topics.
of.
You want to
Yeah.
really go into deep places here.
Mhm.
So this is really what you're looking at, and what your ideas are really shifting
Mhm.
around around these topics.
Yeah. I also like to think about the third house as kind of the way you move in the world. I mean, it's your immediate environment, but it's also your navigation, your transportation in the immediate environment. So somebody with Virgo rising, like the way you walk in the world is with, you carry a great deal of depth. You carry the seeds of the catalyst to transform basically everyone you talk with. You know, I mean, that is what's interesting, is that third house, it's I mean, it is communication, and it's kind of like when you're a baby and you're learning to communicate, you're finding your words, you know, and so it's representative of how you learn and how you use those words. But then as you come into adulthood, it's like you're really carrying this transformative potential for others in all your conversations.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now with this eclipse there, this is a great time to kind of look at that, look at the, you know, the any blocks or wounds that block you from seeing this about yourself, really. And then allow that space.
Right. Allow that
Comes
space.
up. Mhm.
Don't jump right into the conversation. Allow yourself to sit with it and work with it. Go deep, transform your ideas.
Just
Okay.
that.
Just that. Just that. Okay. So now we're going to go on to those of you with Libra rising. This is going to bring the eclipse, new moon, right here into your second house. The second house is self-worth, money, resources, those kind of things. It's really, yeah, how you see your own worth.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really important time for those of you Libra rising to look at that self-worth stuff that gets in the way, because I just talk to so many people who have those self-esteem struggles. It's so common. And I think it can run really deep, and it can set you on unstable ground, where you're always not quite sure where you're at, so this is necessary work to kind of look at what blocks you from loving yourself. I mean,
Yeah.
that's really the simplest question, like, what's happening. And part of that inquiry is really to go in with a sense of spaciousness and no judgment. You don't want to go in there with judgment about what it's supposed to be. It's just really being willing to look and just love yourself. You even if you can't tease through all the complexity and the difficulty and the struggle here, just think of yourself almost as like that child or that animal that you just want to hug and love. And that's what you're going to need to bring into here, and that's a very important thing.
Yeah. It's interesting how that second house is, we think of it as self-worth, self-esteem, money, and resources. Well, so this could be playing out in terms of your finances as well. This area, how much money someone has in the bank and how they value themselves can really get twisted together. And really understanding that your value is not what you have in your bank account can be really challenging, I think, for someone with a Libra rising, because with that Scorpio there's such a depth of potential in judgment there.
Mm-hmm. And there's so much confusion in the society we live in, where we are at cross purposes. We think we are our bank accounts in a funny way when you're living in this sort of
Capitalistic craziness.
Yeah, and it really it's being convoluted into that. And it's really kind of crazy, isn't it? So I mean, there's no wonder that there's judgment.
Yeah.
There's no wonder there's struggle here.
Right.
It's a tough spot.
I think it's really, those of you with Libra rising, really think about what is my relationship between self-esteem, self-worth, and my financial state, and how can I transform that into a real appreciation for my own depth of humanity.
Yeah, and that your resources are far, far more than money. I mean, your resources are this massive catalytic ability to other people, as a transformative ability. I mean, it's powerful, right?
Right. And with Scorpio there, if you have great resources in terms of finances, you can really use those finances as a catalyst to change other people's lives, to change the culture. You are really able to use that kind of catalytic approach with your finances. That's an important thing to think about. So
all right,
there's that. All right. Okay. So just that. All right. So let's go on now to those of you with Scorpio rising. If you've got Scorpio rising, this is very, very personal to you. This new moon eclipse is happening right in your first house, which is the most personal house. This is about you. Mm-hmm. Bottom line, where is your depth? How are you showing up as a catalyst to others in your life? Who are you? Who are you? Are you showing that intense depth? Are you understanding what it is that you bring to the table on a real personal level?
Yeah, and I mean, with Scorpio there, you have to understand as a water sign that as you go out throughout your life, you will expand your consciousness. But there's never an arrival point. There's never an ending to that. It's just being with that process. And that is part of having Scorpio rising, is really recognizing that. But I see this as a major opportunity for Scorpio rising to really look at what is making you tick. What are the things underneath, the deep things that you haven't really tuned into maybe recently, or maybe they're there and you're just trying to ignore it. So, I don't know, the roots of any addictive behaviors you have, the roots of just various wounds that you might feel that you have and you walk around with. I mean, this is an opportunity to work with that. Definitely recommend having somebody to work through that with, because this is an intense placement, and with this the South Node there, but there's really an opportunity of transformative potential here that I hope that you're able to take advantage of. It's very important.
It's so important to really understand where Scorpio is in our charts, because it is such a place of major transformation throughout our lives. And, if you've got Scorpio rising, look back at your life, look at how your personality has been transformed over time and continues to be. And this is, yes, another opportunity for that.
And a big clue is if you feel easily triggered all the time around you, this is a big clue that it's time to take it to another level. I mean, there are resources, there are shamanic ventures you can undergo. It's not just going to the therapist, though that could be very helpful. Taking it to a different level. There are a lot of cool things out there to look at for that.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so let's move on to those of you with Sagittarius rising, and this is going to put the new moon eclipse. Whoops, that's not what I wanted.
I like the crayon.
This is going to put it right in your 12th house. This is an interesting place to have that new moon eclipse happen. 12th house is really, it's what's underneath the surface. It is, it's the unconscious. It's your unconscious. And with Scorpio there, you've got some deep, intense, hidden issues that you now have the opportunity to dig into with this new moon.
Yes, that 12th house, it's so behind the scenes. In a Scorpio, it's just so hidden deep behind those scenes. I think that anybody with Sagittarius rising, like if you can, get yourself out on a little retreat, even if it's just for an hour. I mean, if you can for a weekend, great. But give yourself some solitude in whatever way you can get it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to look like solitude to anyone else. It might just be going in a room for a little bit of quiet for even an hour. I mean, it could make a big difference, but if you do that intentionally, it's going to help you with this, because it's just so tucked away. It just brings me right to, you've got to have some solitude. You've got to have some time to work with this deep emotional content. You've got to understand like what drives you that is completely hidden behind the scenes that you're not even sure of. This is very useful information. It has to do with your impact in the world, because the 12th house is such a worldly yet hidden place, so those are some of the things to think about.
Yeah, there's some deep material for you to be working with. And that your own relationship with your deep unconscious is what needs to be changed. It's so easy. I would think with Sagittarius rising, for a lot of people, it's easy to just leave all that stuff underground and, pretend it's not there and move through your life. And then, you're going to be uncomfortable if you ignore that, because that area, your own understanding of your unconscious, is what has to be transformed. Throughout your life at different times. It's going to demand that you look in that area and do some of that deep internal work. So as that's going on, pause. Yes, take a little retreat, a big one if you can. Take some time.
I think the other point of that is that you will also miss out on incredible richness if you don't work with this area. It's so potent. So don't miss out.
Don't miss out on that, because it'll come back and bite you. Okay, so now let's move on to those of you with Capricorn rising, and this puts the new moon eclipse here in your 11th house. So the 11th house is really, it's community. It's where you receive support from others. Community is a very, very intense place for you. If you've got Capricorn rising.
Yeah, it's also the place where I was just thinking it's where you have the most transformative potential. So it's kind of like you show up in your community in this cocoon, and in your ability to receive the love and support your community, it's like then you can transform into the butterfly. I mean, it really is that place for anybody with Capricorn rising, like to be seen by your community. I mean, whatever that is, whether it's a community you have at work, or whether it's like your alumni community or something like that, or whatever it is, your sports team you're part of. it doesn't matter. The point is that there's a lot of supportive ability here for you to really fly high and transform into your highest self in a lot of ways.
Yeah, if you've got Capricorn rising, the issue of community is important. And it's important that you take time to kind of figure out what that is for you. Yeah, whether it's your whatever, you listed a few ideas of what community might be, but it can be so many different things. And one thing is it's not apt to be your good friends. It's more apt to be like-minded people who support you in your desires. It's not necessarily the community. You don't want to think of it as who you support. If you run the PTA, but you do everything for everybody else, that's not the community. This is the community that supports you. And if you have a community that you do all the supporting of, but you can't think of a community that supports you, maybe that's the transformation that needs to be happening with this Scorpio there, because this community for you has to really be about supporting you to what you desire.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because those of you with Capricorn rising, that's a cardinal sign. So you might be used to coming in and taking charge of things and not really getting your own cup filled. And that's necessary. So, I mean, I think that's a really great point, Laurie.
Yeah.
And, it's with the eclipse potential here, it really is looking at like, what things can you change? Can you rid yourself of that you need to open to something new and different?
Right. And if you are listening to us and thinking, well, I don't even have a community, well, that gives you something that you need to work on. Finding a community that really supports you.
Yeah, because there's so many things it can be. I was just thinking another place might be like a yoga studio, or your gym. There's like it can be any level of thing. So
it could be an online community. There's so many different ways that this could play out. But think about what supports me, what community supports me.
Yeah.
So there. Now we're going to go on and look at those of you who have Aquarius rising. And this is going to put that eclipse in your 10th house. So this is really about the depth and intensity and transformation required in your career, your reputation, how you show up in the outer world.
So bearing in mind with all that Scorpio too, this might be a place that you may tend to get triggered in your workplace. This might be that place where those undealt with emotions are popping up for you. And it can be really intense, or it might be a place in your workplace where people tend to project their deeper, darker, heavier stuff onto you, depending what your job is. So it's something to think about. So it's a good time to really look at that stuff and kind of look at what your feelings are. How do you feel in your workplace? What are some of the deeper what's some of the deeper content here that you may kind of just shuffle over because you're at work, you're busy, it's very external. But really there's this other deeper stuff that's happening. So it's a great opportunity to look at all of that.
Yeah.
In your workplace, especially, or how you show up in public.
And what kind of changes you might like to see occur that will allow you to go into deeper personal depths in your career.
Yeah. And the learning might be around, this is thinking about our whole conversation about giving space, allowing for space. I think that especially in this very external place, like give yourself a little room to contemplate these things, to really think about how you are in your workplace, how it feels, what it's like. Right. I think that would be pretty helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Something in that realm of your workplace, how you show up in the world. You need to be able to really go deep there. And if you aren't, then you need to make some changes. So, okay, we're going to go on to those of you with, let's see if I can get there. Those of you with Pisces rising. So this is going to bring this eclipse, this new moon eclipse, into your 9th house. Okay, 9th house is our worldview. So your worldview is a place where you probably can get very triggered. Can't we all get triggered by our worldview these days? There's so much in in this area. You know, you can think of the ninth house as religion, education, travel, all these areas where we develop our understanding of the bigger picture, our worldview, other cultures. So there's something in that area that is really required for those of you with Pisces rising. This is a real place of deep, deep issues.
Yeah. I think one of the things to consider is to look at what blocks you from thinking for yourself. You know, are you part of something that is kind of affecting your mind in a way that isn't great? You know, like what is blocking you from taking your own agency around your view? Because open-mindedness is a very important direction for us to go in right now. So I think that that's something to really think. And also with Pisces rising, there's just a susceptibility. Pisces is a lovely, sensitive sign, but it's so susceptible to the viewpoints of other people. So really the question here is you need to go deep, take a look, have an understanding of what wounds you've received in regards to your critical thinking skills. And just work with that. So
I love what you just said, because I think that's so right on. That ninth house with Scorpio there, you can just fall into some rabbit holes. So yeah, really, really understanding and taking responsibility for your own worldview. And you know, your worldview with Scorpio there, it's required of you throughout your life to be willing to transform that area. And to go deep, to understand what's in there, and then allow it to change. Allow that bird, that phoenix, to dive into the depths and really grapple with it, and then come out with your own view.
Yeah, very important. And I can see why it'd be so easy to turn away from it, because you know it's kind of public. It's up there in the top of the chart. It's kind of for all to see, and you know it might be easy to not take the time necessary to look at those blocks and work with it. So yeah, easy to get swept up in the tide, right?
Yeah, and I just love that you brought up the susceptibility with Pisces on that line. It's so important to understand that sensitivity and where it can bring us. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, I think we have done our little task here. That was fun. If anyone's still left listening to us, thank you. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up, Jennie?
No, I think this is great. Thank you for listening.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.